Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I would like to talk a little bit more about the 30th anniversary of Pokémon, more specifically, the big release for the 30th anniversary, what we all expect to be the 10th generation, the next mainline games, what supposedly is going to be called Pokémon Winds and Waves, at least based off the Terra leaks. We'll see if that's the final name, but we're all believing that we're going to see a reveal of this in the Pokémon Presents for Pokémon Day at the end of February, as they typically do for every Pokémon Presents at the end of every February. But now we're lined up to get Generation 10, and I think that's going to be a very big deal, especially after the recent rumors and leaks we've been getting about this game, and some of the recent stuff that has come up over the past week has further helped to build up my hype for this, and I would say by a fair margin here, which I think is actually pretty notable, because over the last few releases, I think Game Freak and Pokemon Company have done a good job to diminish our excitement for the Pokemon series, but with this next one, they may be trying to reverse that a little bit, and I think that's actually going to be a pretty big deal, so that's what we're diving into today. Now, before going forward, let me point out I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers, so if you enjoy my videos, I would very much appreciate your subscription. So let's clear up some things that have been going on. There is an event that a variety of different insiders were flown out to this past week, and some people think it might be like this big secret super surprise game. Maybe it is a preview event for Generation 10. It's probably not. Typically these preview events are for games that are about to come out, so for example, at the very beginning of March, we're getting Pokopia, and so I would say it's actually probably a much better bet that people are being flown out to play Pokopia so they can write previews a few weeks before the game comes out. To me, that makes the most sense. I think most people are going to be in agreement with this. It's not some sort of big secret preview event for Generation 10 before it's even actually officially announced. Let's remind ourselves that while we are expecting a 10th generation reveal really soon, we're probably not going to get all the details in this first Pokemon Presents. We'll be lucky if we get some actual gameplay, and I'm really hoping for that, given how big of a deal it's going to be and that it's supposed to be a big game for Switch 2, so they may want to showcase that a little bit. But regardless, we shouldn't be expecting them to show everything so soon, so early on into the year. So the idea of people being flown out secretly to a preview event about a month before it would be revealed doesn't really make any sense. That's not what Nintendo does. That's probably not what's happening here. Now, in another shocking revelation, and by shocking I mean not shocking at all, we seem to have gotten a really good hint as to when we're going to be getting the Pokemon Presents, like not just the day, but also the time. This information has been leaked out thanks to a data mine from the mobile game Pokémon Masters. Apparently it's supposed to be happening February 27th at 11 AM Brazilian time, which, by the way, I took a look, Brazilian time would be matching up to 9 AM Eastern time, which I took a look. That is the time we see all the different Pokemon Presents, and happening on Pokemon Day, that also always happens as well. So this is pretty much exactly par for the course. This is not really shocking in any way, shape, or form, but it is interesting that we have gotten a leak about the actual time for this next big Pokemon presentation. Now, as you see here from this image, some people are trying to extrapolate a little bit more about this event, because you see that there is a Pokemon Masters banner. It is a Pokemon Masters data mine leak, and you'll see that it's the characters from Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So some people are taking this to mean this somehow means a Let's Go 2, and that's also extremely unlikely. One, because we're supposed to get the 10th generation this year. For them to go and do Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee 2 doesn't really make any sense. Why would there be a sequel to Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee as well? Like, if they were to do a sequel, it would be based off Johto, right? Let's Go Johto. So they wouldn't even really use these characters for that. These are just the models of those characters from Pokemon Masters, because it is a Pokemon Masters event. And maybe there's something to do with them than Generation 1, some Generation 1 celebration, because it is the 30th anniversary. But it does not mean we're getting a sequel to Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee for Nintendo Switch 2. That doesn't really make any sense at all. So it's definitely not that. But still, we know the date, we know the time apparently, and it sounds like they're going to get previews out of the way for Pokopia, which means more time to focus on something bigger in the Pokemon Presents, the 10th generation of Pokemon. And we actually got another little thing, another little nugget, and perhaps this is more than just a little nugget. about the 10th generation of Pokemon from a Nate the Hate podcast this past week. And for those that don't know, Nate the Hate is known as a very reliable industry insider, and this is what he said about this next big Pokemon game. Verbatim. From some conversations I've had, it sounds as though Generation 10 is going to be visually pleasing. And I believe what's said here is actually an extremely big deal. If you pay attention to the wording, Nate the Hate's not making a prediction in this case. He's talking about what he has heard from conversations behind the scenes. And so this would be a leak from one of the most reliable leakers there are, assuming it turns out to be true, which I think most people think it probably will turn out to be true. Now, visually pleasing doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the most visually ambitious title for the Nintendo Switch 2, but it does suggest some pretty good things here. So we've heard from the Terra leaks that Generation 10, from the most recent Terra leaks at least, the plan is to make Generation 10 exclusive to Nintendo Switch 2. Now, that in and of itself may be a bit controversial because usually, early on into new Nintendo generations, Game Freak and Pokemon Company do not opt to make an exclusive for the newest console. They usually still make the game for the older console, and just through backwards compatibility, people can enjoy the game. Maybe it'll run a little bit better, and in the case of Pokemon Legends ZA last year, they had a Switch 2 edition, which a lot of people did not expect Pokemon Company to do, to go ahead and make an enhanced version, but as we argued throughout the year, this would probably be the case, because while history may not have suggested otherwise, you also have to take into consideration the changing of the times, and the changing of the times would mean there'd be a lot of Switch 2 enhancements, which includes Legends ZA, which also led to a lot better sales. But to not have a Switch 1 version at all, that is something that perhaps not many of us were ready to see so early on. But the Switch 2 has been selling very fast. We have seen a recent leak that suggests Nintendo has some sort of other bit of hardware they're planning. If that is a Switch 2 Lite, and that does come out this year, that would further boost sales, and that would get out a lot more units ahead of the release for Generation 10, and if that is exclusive, there may be large enough of an audience that Pokemon Company and Game Freak feel comfortable putting out it exclusively for Switch 2, and that would also, in turn, really push sales for the hardware as well, more so than prior Pokemon releases. And if they're making the game exclusively for Switch 2, then that makes it a lot easier for them to make a visually pleasing game. They don't have to be held back by making sure the game runs okay on Switch 1, they can focus on just making it run well on Switch 2. And so with a console that, according to Nvidia, is about 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1, that's also seeing continued updates with DLSS, that gives us a lot of room for optimism here that they can make something that looks and runs a lot better than prior Pokemon games. And one of the cool things about Legends ZA is that it's a mainline Pokemon game that runs at a smooth 60 FPS on Switch 2. We've never seen that before for a mainline Pokemon game, but we got it with Legends ZA Switch 2 Edition. And so considering everything that went wrong with Scarlet and Violet a few years ago, we get the 10th generation of Pokemon, exclusive to Nintendo Switch 2. It's fairly ambitious for the Pokemon series. It is visually pleasing with minimal glitches and issues, and it runs at a smooth 60 frames per second. This is going to be a huge shift for the series. And to be clear, again, no one here is trying to say that the 10th generation of Pokemon is going to be the most visually impressive game on the console. But if it is visually pleasing, if it is something that aesthetically looks nice, and runs well, and looks polished, that's exciting. That bodes really well for the game. We've seen and heard from the Terra leaks that they are playing around with a lot of different mechanics in terms of interacting with the world, the weather systems, the physics, how the lighting works with the Pokemon moving around and stuff. There's a lot of interesting things we've heard that would suggest something that's far more advanced than prior Pokemon games. So with this 10th generation that they've taken an extra year to prepare, that might be exclusive for Switch 2, it may indeed turn out to be truly visually pleasing, performing well, and that alone is just kind of like a really big deal to me. And so I'm very optimistic about this, and we should be seeing it in the Pokemon Presents. Hopefully, they show us more than just concept art here, and they actually give us a little bit of actual gameplay, even if it is early on into the year. As things currently are, we haven't really seen much about any really big major games that are coming out for Switch 2 outside of maybe the Duskbloods, and we're not entirely sure how well that's going to sell because that's a From Software exclusive on Switch 2. That's something we've never really quite seen before. In other words, Nintendo probably does need to showcase some other giant title that's going to be selling millions to get more people interested in the console. Maybe there's a direct or two in this upcoming month or so that showcases other things, but at the very least, we should be expecting a reveal for the 10th generation of Pokémon that is apparently visually pleasing. But what do you all think? Is this enough to get you excited for the 10th generation of Pokémon, or do you need to see more? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.